Guys, let's continue with the topic of proposal for international governance. Notice that I'm talking about the international governance, not just the peacekeeping, okay, which is the focus of the current UN charters and existing international laws. I shifted my focus to international governance. Uh, so the first pillar idea of this new framework is to addressing the gray zone aggression triggers. Uh, so I said that the last time already, you have to satisfy four conditions of persistent, intentional, systematic, organized, uh, hostile actions against some victim countries. So the other one is relatively easy, okay, because it's just and actually it's also basically aligned with the current existing international law because let's face it, the armed attack is the extreme of the four criterion. Armed attack, all military actions, all kinetic military actions must be persistent and probably less persistent to be military action could have a surprising element. But the other three criterion, they all satisfied intentional, systematic, and organized. Okay, so that's relatively easy. I'm just saying that the first pillar idea is consistent with the existing um, international laws. The second one is trickier. We're shifting from uh, military armed attack to welfare laws metrics. So that has several. This is more complicated because I have under these big ideas there are seven. Seven. I mean, in Chinese means that this means the seven because this is sum is five and then plus two is seven. So we have seven smaller ideas under the big idea of a welfare loss. Okay, let me see. The first one is that it shift the focus from armed single dimension of an armed attack to a multi-dimensional framework. So we'll be talking about everything, anything from a trade dispute, from human welfare, human well-being, and infrastructures. Um, Social and cultural, economical, all dimensions. So let me give you an example. A good example would be like China. Now it's probably not many people, not many Americans knows that China is thinking about the building an even bigger dam than the Three Gorges. We're talking about the billions and then kilowatt hours electricity. So it's the biggest in the history. So this is a very important project for China, right? Obviously, but this could trigger the international mitigations because other countries, especially India and Bangladesh, they live under the downstream of the river, and then that they have real concern. So that kind of a thing could have, leads to the welfare loss um, for the other countries, then that would be triggered in the mitigation request. Okay. The second smaller idea under the welfare laws. Welfare, by the way, just you can call it human happiness. You can call that the human well-being, the utilities, those kind of things. Okay. So it's just in economics, we're talking about they have a more academic, a more theoretical way of measuring welfare. Like look at the consumer surplus, look at the supplier surplus. That's more theoretical. I think we'll come down to a single one thing that is bookkeeping. We'll come to this later. So the second small idea is that just like a tort law, just like a tort case, the victim has to initiate the request for initial appeal for the mitigation. Just like a tort law, if there's no complaint, no victim filing, there's no case. So there's no mitigation to talk about. So that's very important. Just like you know in the tort law, domestic individual case, that you have to think about that. The third point is even more interesting because what defines the welfare loss? Let me give you an example that's to illustrate the point. A country can have investment into the cyber security, right? So to basically to fend itself against the cyber attack, the country would have to be like if the country can invest it, 5 million or $5 billion into cybersecurity. However, unless the country can prove that there is a real attack from other foreign sources, otherwise the 5 million or $5 billion investment would be treated as a welfare gain, not welfare loss. Okay, so because by making your cybersecurity um, higher level of cybersecurity, basically you make your citizens gain, not loss. However, there's a big difference. If the country can prove that they do that, they invest in the $5 billion uh, into the cybersecurity because there is a foreign sources that attack the internet infrastructure, then that at least part of the $5 billion will count it as a welfare loss, not a welfare gain. So that's one thing. The number four point that I want to say is that we will set up a kind of a sweet spot. Uh, Basically, that the welfare loss we're talking about will be at least 5% welfare loss. Okay, and but at most 25%. This is arbitrary, but my point is that to have a right line rules, so make it more operationable. So the reason that we set up a 5% of the ceiling level welfare loss and 25% of I'm sorry, the 5% is a floor level and 25% is a ceiling level. There's a reason for that. Because unless the welfare loss is above at least 5%, then you have a minor losses that may be not substantial. So you may be better off to leave the case alone instead of going asking for international mitigation, right? So you have to do the trade-off. Um, on the one hand, you want the loss substantial. Otherwise, if even just one penny loss, you go to the international mitigation, that will flood the system. Um, so this is that will lead to collective loss for everybody, right? Because the resources will be resources are always limited, right? So, but in every case, all the international mitigation agencies, they focus on one penny cases. Then we have a $1 billion cases. That will be a loss for everybody. So you don't want to do that. On the other hand, you do want to have a ceilings. If it's that the ceiling that is arbitrary, is subject to debate. But I was thinking initially, let's set up to 25% of welfare loss. Okay, so that reason is because that if anything beyond the 25% loss, you may have, it's basically make it that their compensation unfeasible. Okay, so that's the reason that we said a 5% and 25%. And the next, the fifth point is the proportional loss. That means that we have to consider every country's their baseline, their GDP, their per capita income, and in order to figure out what is the 25%, let's say. So let me give you an example to illustrate this point. Let's say in the U.S., let's say we have each year we have like 100,000 overdose deaths each year, right? So for that high baseline overdose, you'd have to see a bigger increase in the welfare loss due to the foreign sources, for basically exogenous shocks. Then that would be that. Otherwise, you basically have no case. On the other hand, let's China say China is probably like let's say like a 5,000 overdose each year. So the baseline is much lower. However, the same 25% welfare loss proportion still applies. That could mean that if you have an increase of a 1,000 out of the baseline of a 3,000, and that would trigger the welfare loss. So the country can make legitimate appeal to this one. And then the next point is that how to measure the baseline. That's the whole thing. It's the key things. In fact, I have been able to convince Grok. I don't know how to pronounce the Grok. It's Elon Musk's AI platform. I like it better and better now because I found that their response is higher quality. I think for serious requests, prompt for ordinary people, maybe ChatGPT is good enough, or maybe you can Gemini is a second choice. But for serious inquiries, you really have to go through the three things. Number one is the perplexity. Number two is Claude. Number three is Grok, because they all give you the citations, the sources. So you really have to go through that. But I'm just saying that I was able to initially when I had the first prompt to Grok. Grok has raised many questions, has pretty serious doubt. But as I, having a conversation with Grok, and then now it's really they really become more and more positive. But anyway, so here I'm just saying that baseline of how to decide what is the baseline. That actually varies from country to countries. The one important point is that usually we can use, let's say, like a drug overdose, right? Let's say, you know, the China's dam cases, right? If they, or even let's say like Denmark and Greenland, right? Under my framework, Greenland can appeal international mitigations. If they can prove that the U.S. threatening of overtaking Greenland caused their more than 5% of welfare loss. In terms of resources, foreign directed investment, and those kind of things. So so here, the baseline is how to calculate the baseline. The reason we have two ways. Number one, it can go back to 5 years in the past. You know, if the country's record has been pretty flat from year to year, then we can use a simple average. However, if the record jumps around from year to year, and then we can use the weighted average score. Like current year, we received a weight of 5. The last year is a weight of 4. The year before, weight of 3. Blah blah blah. So basically, that's the thing. that will give the more stable baseline, and then that make the litigation more accurate, more valid. So let's stop here. I have one more case to go.